The greatest wisdom in this country resides in the collective behavior of us as individuals working together voluntarily to solve problems. It's a pretty simple idea, and it was endorsed by people like James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and John Adams, who I have yet to see somebody who has better wisdom than what they came up with.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Undoctrination. I'm Maggie.
And I'm Olivia. And today we have a really interesting guest. John Tillman is in charge of multitudes of organizations and has had a lot of success in the liberty and nonprofit space. And before we get into this, I just want to give him the chance to, John, briefly introduce yourself and tell us what you're working on.
Olivia, Maggie, it's great to be with you and great to be on your show, which has a fantastic title. I was a small business entrepreneur most of my life, sold a business in 2004, part of it, and then eventually sold all of it in 2007 in the retail space. And then I got involved in public policy and politics in 2004, worked with some longtime veterans in the space on spending caps and term limits and property rights for 3 years. Then I launched out on my own in Illinois in 2007. I relaunched the Illinois Policy Institute, was its longtime CEO from then until 2020. I'm still chairman there. And over the years, I've launched a variety of organizations, co-founded the Liberty Justice Center, which won a Supreme Court case, relaunched the Franklin News Foundation, became chairman of that in 2017. It's now the largest wire service in the country that covers state house news, second only to the Associated Press, which isn't really a wire service, but rather a propaganda arm of the radical left. So that's why I say we're the largest. Been involved in Iron Light, which is a boutique for-profit marketing agency, co-founded that, and a variety of other things. I spend most of my time today on the American Culture Project, which I founded in 2018, which is intending to reach independent and sort of voters that switch back and forth with the liberty message.
That's great, Sean.
Oh, that all sounds great. I was about to say, I'm an independent, unaffiliated voter, so maybe you will get me to lean some type of way today. Take it away.
I just want you to lean toward freedom.
Yeah.
Oh, I got that already.
All right, yeah, check. That's really great. And, I really admire you. I'm very familiar with IPI and Iron Light and the Center Square. All of these organizations have been hugely influential on organizations that I've worked for throughout my career. I know we were talking earlier about Pelican in Louisiana. That was also heavily influenced by Illinois Policy Institute. What would you say are some underlying principles or strategies that connect all of these organizations? Because I know you have a lot of different things going on, but I assume that you have a specific vision on how to influence the United States towards more liberty.
Yeah, I have a theory of politics that I call the political vice. The concept of the political vice is if you imagine a three-sided vice, kind of like the old trash compactor in the very first Star Wars movie. Remember when Luke and Leia and Chewbacca get inside that trash compactor and the pressure comes from all sides? Kind of like that. In the vice are politicians, political decision makers. The fourth side of the vice, the top, is where output happens, lefty output or righty output, depending on your political philosophy, but to use those for shorthand terms. And the pressure comes from those three sides: media pressure, public opinion, the people pressure, and influencer pressure. And my theory is that the left understands that this is how politics works, and that they understand that building capacity to work the vice and apply pressure to political decision makers helps you get the output you want, and that the right not only doesn't understand that this operates, that the political vice even exists, it clearly does not invest sufficiently in it. We invest in elections, we invest in public policy and advocacy, but we don't invest in building the broader capacities that really take control of the commanding heights of American culture. So all the work I've been doing, everything that I'm involved with in some form or fashion, is designed to take back the commanding heights of American culture through media, through the people, or through influencers, to try to get better control of the political actors inside the vice.
I love that, because I have frequently spoken about how the right just really either doesn't get or doesn't care to understand what is missing from our side of the political sphere. Because yes, we do invest in candidates, we invest in policy institutes, we invest in all the electoral side of things, but we don't invest in culture. And when conservatives try to infiltrate culture, it almost comes off as like an off-brand version of leftist culture. Let's just make a conservative parody or a conservative version of this instead of creating something brand new or investing in something brand new. It's why we get so mad at Hollywood and celebrities and artists and movie stars, because the left has a monopoly on them instead of promoting our own types of people.
Yeah, I've been raging about this a lot
I've
recently
seen you tweet about it too.
But I'm really interested. So how did you go from small business owner, because I assume you weren't that involved in politics before 2004, you said. How did you go from a small business owner to someone who was starting multiple nonprofits to fix these issues? What was your radicalization moment?
It wasn't any one particular moment. It was a series of life events and also my sort of innate interest. I joke, and of course you'll be able to do the math and figure out my age at this point, but I joke that I'm the only 9-year-old in 1968 who watched both political conventions gavel to gavel and thought it was interesting. My brothers were out doing other things at most, they were 11 and 13 at the time, doing what normal boys would do. But I really thought politics was sort of interesting. I liked the showmanship of it, the gamesmanship of it. And so I started paying attention to politics ever since then. I worked in the library in high school, read all the newspapers, became very interested in journalism. I came of age during Watergate and the coverage of all of that. And so when I went to college, I started out as a journalism major and a political science minor. I fulfilled my minor requirements almost instantly because I could not get enough of it. But I eventually switched to business and went into business when I graduated from college, but never lost my passion for politics. I was always the guy in my 20s and 30s who would be at a party and I could tell you who all 9 Supreme Court justices were, who the Senate president was, who the Speaker of the House was. I could name half the cabinet. And of course, nobody gave a damn. Nobody wanted to talk to me, but I was obsessed with it. So I was paying a lot of attention throughout my life. And then, of course, meanwhile, I was working in the free enterprise capitalist space that is our supposed market economy here in the United States, and began to really see just how miraculous free enterprise is. The way I've come to express that now is that the founding principles of this country and our free enterprise system are the greatest force for good ever created in the human sphere to improve the human condition. And that's particularly true for the poor and disadvantaged. Long story in my personal life, but parents got divorced when I was young. My mother was paranoid schizophrenic, in and out of mental institutions. And so we didn't have it too easy, and there was a lot of difficult times. And I was around a lot of people that had a lot of financial success and came from affluent to wealthy homes. So I got to watch how people started out with nothing and then made something of themselves through the American system. And I thought it was a miracle. And so eventually, when I was in a position to get involved in it in my mid-40s and I was selling a business, I just started cold calling every nonprofit organization I'd identified by then and trying to find a way in. And as the story goes, I literally made hundreds of phone calls and nobody wanted to talk to me. There's an apocryphal story in Chicago about the kid who shows up at the Department of Streets and Sanitation, the city of Chicago, and says, "I'd like to work here." And the supervisor looks at him and says, "Who sent you?" And he says, "No one sent me." And the supervisor in the Chicago way said, "We don't want nobody sent." And it was kind of like that when I tried to go work in public policy. I had no particular qualifications, but eventually I talked my way in 2004 and got started on it. So just always had a passion for it. And then I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. So I like building. I really like launching and building things and working with great people and great leaders. And I've had the great privilege of working with amazingly talented people throughout this process.
Well, that's very admirable. And can I ask, from a young age, when you were entering college and you were at these parties talking about politics, did you self-perceive as somebody who wanted to change the world or was going to change the world or the country someday?
As weird as it is to say, yes, I had a great imagination, and I imagined all kinds of world-altering dreams, most of which crashed on the rocks of reality.
Yep.
but some of them, I was a big dreamer, and people years ago, I was interviewing a person that I knew, somewhat an acquaintance, and we had a mutual friend who worked for me, and during this interview with this person, he said to me that mutual acquaintance who worked for me said, "Well, you got to be careful when you talk to John because he has grandiose ideas." And, I thought, yes, that's true. Audacious ideas and the big dreams are fun. And even if you don't get all the way to the top of the mountaintop, the view from 10,000 feet is still pretty good, even if that peak's 2,000 feet higher. The 10,000-foot view is not bad. So I like big dreams. I've always had big dreams. And I still have big dreams to this day.
So, follow-up question. You said a lot of those dreams kind of crashed on the rocks, but what are some of the, your top dreams that you actually did accomplish that may have helped change the country or change the world? And the second part is, what advice would you give to young people who want to do the same or accomplish the same?
I'll start actually in my business life. In my business life, I took over and I started out in the call center business. And in the call center business, people who come to work in the call centers do it out of desperation. They do it because you can make a lot of money in a short period of time. It's usually a part-time job for most salespeople, even though the management team is full-time. And what I learned very quickly when I took over my first office, and even when I was an assistant manager waiting to get my turn at running an office, is that we really needed to focus on solving people's personal crisis. Almost anybody that walks in that door has some sort of personal financial crisis. And most of my colleagues didn't look at it that way. I always looked at it as, if we help them become great salespeople, we can help them solve their financial crisis and improve their life. And that made the work more meaningful. And when I got to Chicago, I took over an office that had 80 salespeople in Oak Park, which is on the western border of Chicago. And the two offices I'd worked in previously, one in Detroit and one in Washington, D.C., were very integrated, about 40% African American and 60% white. What was interesting about Detroit was very much working class, both black and white alike, mostly working class people in the Detroit office, some exceptions to that. But in Washington, D.C., it was mostly highly educated, most graduate degrees, black and white alike. So you got to see this really interesting racial makeup, 60-40, black or white to black, but working class in both cases in Detroit, and professional in both cases. And it was really an eye-opener. In Detroit, they were looking for that job out of desperation financially. It was unemployment. Detroit was about 30% of the time. In Washington, D.C., where unemployment was under 4%, it was so expensive that people had to have a second job while they worked for the government back then. So then when I get to Chicago, we had 80 employees, about 60 were white and 20 were black. But we had an overwhelming demand of people calling, asking for jobs. 300 people would call every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday looking for work. Now, to give you some perspective on that, in Washington, I'd get 20 phone calls a week for people looking for work. In Chicago, 300 phone calls in 3 days. But 85 to 90% of them were African American calling from residents in the city of Chicago. And it turns out my predecessor wouldn't hire him because he thought that Southern and Midwestern whites and Eastern whites, that we called all over the country, wouldn't buy from somebody who, quote unquote, sounded like they were from the city. And well, I knew that was bullshit. I hope I can swear on your show. So we opened up the spigots, and shortly after that, we had 300 salespeople, and 250 of them were black, and only 50 of them were white. So we had this complete, amazing cultural milieu of an experience. And it wasn't always easy. There were lots of challenges. I was accused of racism all the time. And but the beauty of that environment was a sales environment. So if somebody would make an accusation that they weren't getting the good leads, it's a little like Glengarry Glen Ross. If you've ever seen that show, it's an amazing film you should watch. This was a little bit like that. I would just give them the leads and say, here's the standards. If you can perform at the standard, you can keep getting those leads. If you can't hit the standard, you can't. It was a beautiful meritocracy. And that was life altering for me. It changed my outlook on life. It really opened my eyes to how the world really works. I always joke that everything I needed to learn about leadership and management and the human condition, I learned in the call center business. And I've taken a lot of those lessons with me into this world. I think the biggest change that I've brought to the movement, and I say this with great modesty, there's many, many people that have been involved in this, but when I first started in 2004 and rolling ahead to 2007, is part of the reason I got involved is I was a marketer, and very much a data-driven marketer. And I wanted to bring marketing principles to selling the greatest force for good ever created in the human sphere. So I wanted to bring a marketing-centric approach. I once said that when introducing the head of another nonprofit, a very well-known, renowned person, years later when I made my mark a little bit and had this opportunity to introduce this person. And I talked a little bit about bringing a marketing-centric approach to selling liberty. And this individual, who was a little pedantic and tight, shall we say, a little uptight, got to the podium and looked at me and said, John, marketing-centric is not even a word. And in a nutshell, that kind of explains the problem of policy-driven idea engineers is they don't know how to sell. And I wanted to come here and help sell. And I think I've had an impact on helping the movement become better at selling.
Wow. And so One, I would just say, I think we have almost like a little bit personal connection. So my family is from Detroit. My grandfather moved our family from Detroit to DC. He grew up working class black man. He worked up from a shoe shine to the mailroom to a higher, like a manager level in the company he was in Detroit. And he ended up moving to DC to get a job, and he ended up working in government and civil rights. So he was working on basically making sure nobody was being discriminated against unfairly in government jobs. So that's so interesting that you kind of have a similar background. And so you've had many great accomplishments, as I can tell. What advice would you give to somebody who wants to make a similar impact?
Find really talented people and partner with them to build something meaningful that changes people's lives for the better. All of my success is dependent on having worked with amazing colleagues. I have spent, one of the things I talk about a lot is to always be recruiting talent. And I am always recruiting and looking for superstar talent. The way I used to put it in the call center business, and I've applied this rule to everything I've ever done since then, is, if you have 300 salespeople, you have the top performers here and you have the lower performers here. And the lower performers are usually newer people who are figuring it out. But sometimes those lower performers are people that have been there a month and they're never going to figure it out. And you got to let them go. The way I always used to put it, you have the mean right in the middle, the mean performance. In life, we get paid by the mean. We don't get paid by our best day. We don't get paid by our worst day. We get paid on average by how we produce. And so philosophically, when it comes to talent recruitment, I always say when we reduce the bottom, we want to add to the top. And what I mean by that is you want to always be raising the mean of your talent level. So the next person you hire should be a top 10% performer. And if you do that successfully, you're not going to bat 100%. But if you bat 5, 6, 7, 8 times out of 10, over time, the talent mean will rise in your organization. And so I always look for very talented people. I spend probably 20 to 30% of my time interviewing and talking to potential people, even when I don't have an opening for them, because I'm just relentlessly looking for talent. And eventually opportunities to deploy talent present themselves. And so I think my biggest piece of advice to somebody who wants to make a difference is go seek out talented people. If you're in a sort of a junior role and you're not ready to start your own thing, find a leader who's superstar talented and go try to work with them and learn how it's done and learn from them. The other thing I would say is when you're in a leadership position and you're recruiting talent, is your job is to create an environment where people always used to say to me in my call center days that I was a great motivator, and I never accepted that. I am not a great motivator. What I am pretty good at is creating circumstances in which people become highly self-motivated. So what I want to do is create an environment. If you two and I were working together, I would want to get into your heads and figure out what makes you tick and what motivates you. And I would want to create a work environment where you are going to want to go after it because it makes you feel so good and happy and proud of your own accomplishments. And I want to make sure that that is aligned with the vision and mission of the organization. That's, I think, how you approach team building, whether you're starting out as a teammate or eventually become a leader.
We need more bosses like you.
I know, right?
World.
I'm like, wow, this is inspiring. Yeah, I think for my generation, actually entrepreneurship, from what I've seen, is on the rise within our generation because people in our generation don't want to have bosses. But I think part of this is like a rejection that older generations have anything to teach us. And you know what I mean? And
I do, sadly.
Yeah. And I think that's like a distinctly negative thing, although I think entrepreneurship is like a net good on the world. But a lot of people just feel this overwhelming despair at the state of the world. And I was listening to another podcast that you had done about a year ago, where you talked about how the political climate when you were growing up was very similar in that you were going through a lot of wars. There was a really big recession and the end didn't seem like it was in sight, and how, things did turn around under Reagan's leadership. But I'm wondering, is that turnaround still possible? Do we still have hope to sell young people for a better future, or are things kind of irreparably damaged, especially within the advent of the internet and social media?
Yeah, are we all gonna die? Is it hopeless? Please tell us. Please tell us.
I have bad news. We definitely are all going to die.
Okay.
This is true.
Hopefully,
that is true.
Hopefully not simultaneously is the key point.
Yes.
one of the things I say a lot is, by the way, all great marketing requires repetition, so that's why I say it a lot. Is American greatness is not a birthright. It has to be earned by every generation. And I'm sad to tell you that my generation, the baby boomers, have pretty well screwed the pooch. I mean, we have done a very bad job of stewarding this country, and baby boomers are responsible, not just the baby boomers, the generation prior to us, but have been largely responsible for some of the systemic problems we have, both in terms of our economy, our governmental fiscal debt, and as well as our cultural, to be blunt about it, our cultural decline and division and insanity. But the question is, should we be hopeful? And the answer is absolutely, we should be hopeful. And the reason we should be hopeful is we've been through terrible things before. The remedies in those terrible things, as I said, wasn't inevitable. And sometimes it took a long time to fix the flaws in the country. Look how long it took to fix the flaw of slavery. You know, and that they started on trying to fix slavery in 1820. It took a long time, generations, to fix slavery, and it took a very bloody, horrible war to do it, which was worth doing because it had to be fixed. It took a long time to fix Jim Crow. It took a long time to get out of the Great Depression, which happened in 1929. We never really got out of it fully until the war started. It took a long time for the civil rights movement to get fixed, and it took a long time to fix the malaise of the 60s and 70s, the period that you started out talking about that I lived through. You know, when I was coming of age, we had a lost war in Vietnam that divided the country. We had the assassinations of John and Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and we had the corruption. Although now it looks sort of like robbing a candy store, but we have the corruption of what was Watergate and the removal of Nixon. And then we had the Iranian hostage crisis, where Americans were held by the Iranian government for 500 and some days, I forget the exact number. And the particular incident that I think you're referring to, Maggie, is the day that the hostage rescue attempt happened in the desert of Iran, and it failed, and the helicopters crashed, and our brave servicemen died trying to rescue the hostages. And a classmate of mine, a good friend of mine, Jim Jeanette, was sitting outside a classroom that morning when we just heard the news, and was crying and saying, "Will America ever be great again?" And I don't remember what my reaction was. I don't know exactly what I said. I think I said, yes, I think so. But, that fall, Ronald Reagan was elected and things changed. And they changed fairly quickly. People forget it only took a few years relative to all of the 15 or 20 years of challenge. Within 3 years, the country was off and running in a really amazing way. It wasn't perfect, and Reagan was not perfect, but it got better. And the essence of why it got better is because Reagan believed deeply in the core nature of the American people. And it was really the American people who he motivated by creating circumstances for them to become self-motivated. He unleashed the animal spirits, if you will, of American desire and ambition. And I think that one of the things that's interesting to me about where we are as a country and the human condition is there's two natures in all of us. There's the nature that the left is now appealing to, which is I have group identity. I'm black, I'm brown, I'm gay, I'm overweight, I'm too skinny, I'm too tall, I'm too short, whatever victim class you want to pick, because there are now 14 million of them. The left appeals to the victimization mindset, the grievous mindset. And it's very clever because it's very appealing and seductive. What they are saying to you is that when you have a calamity in your life, and everyone has calamities in their life, even the billionaire in the ivory tower has calamities in his life. I know because I talked to some of them. They have unhappiness in their lives. None of their unhappiness has to do with money, but they have unhappiness just like anyone else does. And when those calamities happen, you didn't get into the school you wanted. Your children didn't get into the school you wanted. Your children got flunked by the teacher in third grade for misbehaving. You didn't get the promotion at work you thought. Your boss is a jerk instead of a supportive person. Whatever that calamity is, what the left says to you is it's not your fault. You're a victim, and you're a victim of this American founding with a fetish on individuality and individual sovereignty, and it allows people to take advantage of the system and exploit you. And we're here to help you. we're going to, using the government, put our foot on the scale to properly allocate opportunity and resources, and we're going to make it better for you. If you're suffering, that is a very seductive argument, and it appeals to our desire for that victimization. We all have been there. We've all had a bad day. We've all had a bad experience, and having that person put their arm on your shoulder and say, it's going to be okay, I'm going to take care of you, feels pretty good. But what the founders understood is there's another aspect of the human condition, and that is that natural human desire to grow, to build, to collaborate, to aspire, to have hopeful dreams. The very first caveman and woman, they started decorating that cave right away. They might have started chipping out some more rocks to make it bigger right away. The human condition is to build, to improve, to create. That is the other side of the coin. And we are in a battle between two philosophies: the philosophy that wants to draw people into dependency and victimization versus the battle for hope, aspiration, and building a better tomorrow than we have today together voluntarily. And I am hopeful that that vision is still resilient in the American spirit, and with right leadership, it will be unleashed in much the same way it was in the 1980s.
Wow. I'm hopeful now.
You know what's interesting? I think part of it is this idea that we need to be happy all of the time, that happiness is the baseline human state. When really, when you're victimizing yourself and accepting these handouts and this help from, the wolf in the forest who actually wants to eat you, it's soothing, right? But it doesn't, that pain, because it's soothed, doesn't push you to going further and achieving something, which is what's going to bring you real happiness and satisfaction. It's just soothing, but that runs out, So it's kind of this help is almost a drug to keep us sedated and less connected with ourselves and our purpose. And that's really sad. And I think you're right, it's very seductive. I am from Louisiana, and, I grew up in an upper middle class background, but I've lived in a lot of places that weren't that, and I wasn't always reliant on my parents. I kind of tried to separate at the age of 18 financially for the most part. And so I know a lot of people who are in those situations, and for them, it is very seductive. It is very seductive to want to go on food stamps or WIC or whatever kind of government program it is, because it feels like there is no other option. And we've kind of set up a society where there isn't another option because life is really expensive due to government intervention. And that's the main source of help. So I totally understand what you mean. It does feel like that American spirit hasn't been fully unleashed yet. I think I've been seeing pockets of it, but I think the pockets of it that I've been seeing have been on the right, but in more nefarious ideologies and movements that are also promising the government will step in and enforce some policies here or there, and some pretty nasty ideas are sweeping throughout the right. And it seems like people are losing faith that freedom will actually solve a lot of these issues. The one beacon of hope that I've seen, and I was telling you earlier that I was in Argentina when he won, is Javier Milei, who is unleashing that, they call it the lion spirit in Argentines, right? And he knows that the hardworking business people and entrepreneurs are the real heroes of society, not the politicians and parasites that come in and try to take everything away. But speaking of the right, are you familiar with what I'm talking about? This movement and tendency in the right now to trend more towards. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm a signatory to the Freedom Conservatism Statement, and I have written extensively about this. And I think the idea of national conservatism as expressed, where we're going to use the power of the government to try to work a conservative agenda, is one of the most ridiculous ideas I've ever heard in my life. I mean, let's just look at the evidence of how the government is doing so far. Look around you. We have unprecedented debt. We're literally printing money to bankrupt the future of the country. We can't rebuild our infrastructure because we have so much of a debt load. Schools fail. We have record spending at every level of K through 12 education, and performance continues to decline. Why on earth and then meanwhile, during this current administration, we're making massive multi-billion-dollar investments at the government's choosing into technologies and businesses that don't have a market, such as green energy. Whatever your thoughts are on climate change, the issue is if you're going to invest in climate and green energy, should the government be making those investments, or should the private sector, who has a much better sharp pencil on making investments, be making those investments? Every one of the government's investments in that respect has failed. And now we want to give them more power. From a conservative point of view, this is absolutely ridiculous. The greatest wisdom in this country resides in the collective behavior of us as individuals working together voluntarily to solve problems. It's a pretty simple idea, and it was endorsed by people like James Madison and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and John Adams, who have yet to see somebody who has better wisdom than what they came up with.
Yeah, I was just writing this article for Breitbart recently about how several of the off-coast wind turbine projects off of New York and New Jersey, they've been canceled. They were funded by the government, and they came back and said, actually, the supply chain crisis and the inflation is affecting the cost of the parts that we need to build this, and they just stopped building it. It's just really not how it works. You need the free market's permission, essentially, to fund such huge projects like that. And I kind of wanted to circle back to something that you said prior to this question. I'm actually really glad that you acknowledged older generations, namely baby boomers, for their kind of role in the current state of today. And I've tweeted about this, and sometimes it comes across wrong as I'm Generation Z, so it comes across as like I hate old people, like I'm ageist or something. I'm really not. I love my grandparents, God bless them. Love my Gen X parents, God bless them. But it's like we didn't raise ourselves, like the degenerate culture that is very prominent today had boomer and silent generation and Generation X parents. And we were left a government and left an economy that was put in place by these people. And obviously no one person is individually responsible besides like, I don't know, Jerome Powell, but it's like, let's be for real. Let's actually, I know we have like this whole collectivism thing going on right now. Maybe we can have a collective response and just acknowledge the onus that all generations have, because I think Generation Z, I'll be the first one to say, a lot of people, we complain about no jobs or no this or no that. A lot of people just don't want to work. I think that there's a lot of truth to that. A lot of people, like Maggie said, they're not content with just living the life that our parents lived, having like a single starter home, buying average clothes, not having the latest fancy doohickey and all that kind of stuff. Like we're not reaching satisfaction as easy as past generations do. So we feel like we have to buy more and get into more debt and just feel really depressed with our lives. So I'm glad you said it, because for the audience, it'll come across a lot better coming from you who knows these generations, who is part of these generations, who can say, yeah, we kind of have to like do better. We all have to do better.
So while you were speaking, I was reminded of one of the most popular subreddits. Are you familiar with Reddit, John? Okay.
Oh, yes.
Awesome.
Yes, despite my gray hair and my boomer status, I know about Reddit.
Yeah, I assumed you did. But it has 2.8 million members, and it is in the top 1% of subreddits on Reddit, r/anti-work. And their tagline is unemployment for all, not just the rich. It's an entire subreddit of people just complaining about work and wishing they could be unemployed or something and survive. And yeah, there's definitely this idea that like it's not fair that we have to work to survive.
Go back to the mines or something. Like it's just so ridiculous. We live better than 99
jobs.
We sit on our computers. We're professional yappers. We talk for a living. We give our opinions for a living. We just sit here and
we
yap.
are so blessed. Like what?
like a generation ago, we would have been in the freaking mines. We would have died in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. Okay, so I just.
By the way, This is very close to satire right here. This was almost satire. We're professional yappers. We sit and talk. I mean, there is satire out there about some of that because people complaining that they have to go into an office and actually produce something of a tangible nature. I think this is actually a really interesting and important topic because everything we just talked about there in the last few minutes is a reflection of cultural norms and how cultural norms are shaped. I was on a call recently with a group of people who are all roughly of your generation or slightly older. And one of the other people on that call was my generation. And after we got off the call, we both looked at each other and kind of went, millennials. And it was a reflection.
Everyone hates millennials.
Yeah, we're allowed to talk about millennials.
I feel so bad for the millennials. They are totally in the vice grip of between the generations. But I don't even know either of us really knew what we meant other than, when we were coming of age, there was not this touchy-feely kind of thinking in the workplace. Now, you went to work and you either produced and did well and you got some acknowledgement, or you didn't and you were let go or you moved on or whatever. But there was not this whole self-actualization mindset like, where's my pleasure on the daily basis and can I just go home tonight and watch my show or today and not have to work today? I think, but this goes to a deeper point. The deeper point is about human fulfillment. And people being propagandized that fulfillment comes from not working. Believe me, I get plenty of leisure time. I get plenty of vacation, but I love my work and I work a lot. The key thing is that in our society, we've created this norm that work is not bringing pleasure. Work is one of the most important ways that humans exercise their minds, their imaginations, and build things, which is part of the human construct, as I said earlier. And this idea that people should live a life of not working, I can assure you that if you, especially when you get to be my age, and so I have a lot of friends who are retiring or retired not so long ago, and there's really two categories of people. And I think this applies not only to the retirees I'm about to talk about, this applies to people in their 20s and 30s and so forth who don't want to work. The people who retire, who have a plan and stay busy, either with their investments or a part-time job or a hobby, volunteer work, whatever, those people live long, fruitful, fulfilling retirement lives for 15, 20 years. Those people who can't wait to quit working and they're going to go sit on the couch and do the baby boomer version of gaming. I don't even know what that would be, but they're going to sit around and watch TV or maybe read a book and really bingo, there you go, bingo, and do nothing. Those people die quickly and unhappily. And I think that applies. If you don't have something to occupy your mental abilities and to pursue and to build, you atrophy. And that's why I think this is all part of culture. People have been sold that not working is a good idea. Yeah. I think overworking is not a good idea. I do overwork, but for most people in our society, we have enough leisure time, I think, to create a proper balance. And finally, on this subject, I will say that these kind of conversations and this sentiment is strictly a Western thing and particularly an American thing. You want to go to, speaking of Western, go to West Africa. My friend Orphe Devangay, who was born in Gabon, West Africa, he said none of these things are happening there. You know why? Because everybody's just trying to make a living and keep a roof over their head. They don't have the luxury of whining about not working. They don't have the luxury of panhandling. They don't have the luxury of children and gender dysphoria because everybody is just trying to survive at the basis of levels.
Prosperity brings room to think about other things, and
that's exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, we're spoiled and like how do spoiled children act?
I mean,
right?
It was back to what you were saying earlier about people just not feeling enough, and it's just so seductive to just the idea of just being on government welfare. And it reminds me of how caged or entrapped animals act after they've been with humans for a long time, like in a rehab center or just, farm animals. They live shorter lifespans. They're almost like unevolved. Even if they were born in the wild, they're almost unevolved in that they don't have the muscles, they don't have the brain capacity, they don't have like the hunter or even prey mindset. They don't know how to get away from predators and things like that. That's how humans act when we lean on the government. We don't even prepare for the worst to happen because we're just like, oh, the government will take care of it. Like, oh, the farmer will bring me my food. What happens when the farmer doesn't bring you your food?
Yeah.
I think
Sorry. I think what people are missing is the hero's journey in their lives. Like usually your 20s are supposed to be about like setting out and
It's grind time.
It's grind
They don't
time.
want to grind.
But I do think like I don't mean to be anti-technology. I love technology and I think it's done amazing things for our world and we're so interconnected and everything. But like we are just using our leisure time in a really negative way. And like imagining our free time as like a bowl of coins, like where are we throwing those coins, right? Like what are we giving to? And it's usually just like mindless entertainment. And so of course people feel like they don't have, you know, that time to self-actualize and do all of that stuff. And it's because, you know, they're putting their energy and effort towards something that's like just really mindless and doesn't have any impact. It's interesting that you're talking about retirement. My grandfather, who lives in North Georgia, he retired and used to work in nuclear energy. And he was very hardworking, grew up very, very poor. But over time, he just worked very hard and, you know, made a really great life for himself. And once he retired, he was just like chilling out at his farm in the mountains and went, I'm extremely bored. And so he got a job at Ace Hardware at the gun counter in town. And he
I love that.
loves it. Like, obviously that wasn't ever gonna be his career, but like he loves talking to people about firearms. He has a sense of community, he's working. And like he looks very young. Like you would not look at him and think, oh, he's retired. But it's because he's like keeping himself young by like, you know, being part of the community and working. I do kind of want to transition, if that's okay, into talking about how the government's influence in our lives has kind of robbed us of this agency, how it's created the Gen Z individual that's just like constantly asking for stuff. I'm curious what your thoughts are, because I know in Illinois you have had several like school choice battles. Do you think public schooling has a huge part to play? Or even if it's just like a minor role, what do you think public schooling is doing to this generation?
I think it's indoctrinating them to a mindset that is very unhealthy. I think it blows me away what is going on in K through 12 public education today. And the fact that the pandemic helped it become public and people got to actually see transparently what's going on in their classrooms in a way they had not before, I think has been very healthy for the country. The question is, will it sustain itself and will people stay on it? And what's been interesting is so far it seems to be doing that. It seems like a switch has flipped in terms of people's mindset. We're seeing the greatest success of the school choice movement that we've ever seen, with more movement everywhere. And I think what is particularly interesting about it in terms of the intersection of politics and policy and education as a specific example is red states are starting to do what blue states do, which is red states are becoming much more aggressive in passing much more aggressive pro-conservative founding principle type of policies when they have political control. One of my laws of politics is that when Democrats get elected, even with the smallest of majorities, they can't wait to implement their agenda. And when Republicans get elected, even with the largest of majorities, they can't wait to equivocate on their agenda. And that is always, you know, and people wonder why Donald Trump got elected. That's one of the reasons Donald Trump got elected and still has a great following, is because people felt he was going to actually do something. And Republicans forever have been voting in people who do nothing. Or only do it on the margins and are not bold, are not audacious, big, dreaming thinkers. Whatever you may say about Trump, he certainly has big ideas, and that is appealing to a lot of people. But what's happening now, whether it's Governor Reynolds in Iowa, what's going on right now in Alabama, and certainly what Governor Abbott in Texas is doing, I spoke to him at a Republican Governors Association event recently about the Republicans who are taking teachers union money, who are blocking reforms that give more power to parents where their children go to school. He's now taking them out in primaries, and hopefully he'll be successful like that, much like Governor Reynolds was in Iowa. We're seeing people take on the education bureaucracy and the teachers unions. I think the teachers' unions are clearly the most powerful political organization in the country. They have more employees and members in that union, and they permeate every aspect of our society because they're teaching our children. And the teachers' unions, the teachers' union in the 1960s, when it was nascent, was very different than today's teachers' unions, which are radical leftist indoctrination vehicles through our public education system. We actually pay them to indoctrinate our children with anti-American propaganda. So I think it's been very important in producing these children who are coming out and then go on to protest with the most hateful and unbelievable points of view on our college campuses today. The controversy at Harvard and MIT and Penn are all downstream of what's been happening in K through 12 education, because those elite students are showing up at those elite universities. They've been well prepared for what those professors want to indoctrinate them in further. So it's a terrible problem. And going back to your starting this out with the question of agency, I think one of the most outrageous things about the left's desire to put people in the dependency class and the grievance and victimization culture is its attack on human agency. Essentially, what they're saying to you is that you are not a whole person. You do not have full control of your destiny, of your life. Your life is determinative based upon the identity we assign you. You're a Black woman, you're a Black man, you're a Hispanic immigrant, you're obese, your sexuality isn't mainstream, you're unique and different in terms of that. All those things are burdens on you, and only we can come in and fix it, and you have no agency. I call it creating the dependency ceiling. Yes, you get some security in return for giving yourself over to them and giving up your agency, but you create a false ceiling on your upside potential. And they want you to have that sense of that false ceiling to limit your upside thinking and your dreams. They want you to stay in their control. And the other side of and part of that is appealing, going back to our earlier conversation, because it creates security and predictability and makes you sort of feel good that you're being taken care of. There are certainly times in my life, particularly when I was going through the issue with my mother, as I mentioned, when I was a senior in high school, she was institutionalized for a fairly long period of time. And my brothers had all left, so I was living home alone, and I played football, and my football coach came to talk to me and said, you really can't live alone like this while your mom's gone. And there's these 3 families that'll take you in, friends of mine and their parents, or you can come and live with my wife and me. My football coach is like 30 years old. It's unbelievable. And so I lived with my football coach the fall of my senior year. And the point of that is, when they came, I can feel the emotion of it right now. When they came, I was sort of a victim of circumstance. When they came to me and said, we'll take care of you, that felt good. But, when my mother got out of that institution, it was time to go home and be with her. And that's what I did. And it was hard because she was never better, So we have to build a society that does give people the hand on the shoulder and has empathy for the struggle that people have. But we should never build a society that brings them into that permanent love of that dependence and that victimization. We have to always, even if it requires a gentle push them back to going and being humans of agency to control their own destiny and pursue their own dreams.
So I think he kind of answered the next few questions we had, because I honestly just wanted to put in and specifically name DEI and ESG in terms of public schooling and its influence on the lack of agency that people have, especially in corporations as well. Do you have any insight behind why DEI and ESG and those types of diversity and equity policies, these Marxist cultural policies, are being pushed forward with such gusto, and it's suddenly so popular? Because I feel like a few years ago it was like CRT, that's the new thing, critical race theory, but now it's in everything. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the controversies with Boeing and different airlines about their hiring practices, whether they're hiring the best person for their job, or because we've had multiple malfunctions with flights this year. I was just wondering if you had any insight behind that, why the sudden big push, and will it kind of expire? Will people just get tired of it and just move on with it?
Before I address your question, I have to just quickly mention the Babylon Bee cartoon on the DEI hiring at United Airlines and others, where they have a picture of this middle-aged white man in the pilot seat as the captain, and it says, it's a promotion that says, for a $100 upgrade, you can get a middle-aged white man to fly your plane. I just thought that was.
I saw one. My pilot on the way here was a middle-aged white man, and I said, oh,
I feel like I've only had middle-aged white male pilots.
Yeah, I do think the problem is overblown. There's not like a bunch. There's nobody that I've never had a pilot that looks like me or as young as me or anything like that. So I don't actually think they're just hiring like any old person to be a pilot. But I think in a world where DEI is so prevalent now, and especially in the last few years,
it is concerning.
It's a reasonable
if people
question
hired
or concern to have. I think.
I think I'm going to play a little bit more with the pilot story, and then we'll come back to your question because they're connected. 15 years ago, when I started seeing women pilots and young pilots relative to my age, black and white and brown and everything in between, it was happening all the time. They'd walk by the cockpit, and there'd be a long-haired blonde woman. Oh my God, there's a long-haired blonde. It was really striking. I'd never seen that before when that first started happening. I never, ever had a doubt about her competence, ever, because this was 15 years ago. I knew she was qualified to fly that plane. And when the young guy was sitting in that seat, and he looked like he was 25, but he was probably 30, 32, 33. I knew he was qualified to sit in that seat, whatever the person's race was. Never, ever occurred to me. But now it occurs to you because they're purposely saying we're going to hire people based upon their identity, not based upon their qualification. Whereas then when we lived life, we knew people were in those chairs because they were qualified. This is such a disservice to people of color, to women, to anybody that has been given an identity. It's such a disservice because now that person sits there and there's doubt. You wonder, are they a diversity hire and are they as qualified as they should be, or not? And so the DEI, there's two aspects to why this has happened, Olivia, in answer to your question. One is that critical race theory, DEI, this is all an extension of Marxism and Marxist philosophy. The reason they had to use race and eventually identity as the core element of their Marxist theory is because the original working theory of Marxism was that the proletariat, the working class, were screwed by the system, and therefore they had to arise and unite to take on the wealthy. What happened was capitalism was so successful that the working class started buying cottages in northern Michigan and having ski boats and snowmobiles and jet skis at their second home while working in the factory. You lose your revolutionary zeal when you can go up to Walloon Lake in Petoskey, Michigan with your family and you're a blue-collar person with a high school education. That is pretty freaking great. I meant to say frickin', but somehow the other one came out a little bit more.
No, I get your point. Yeah. And that's when people start to break it down and say, well, you're white, you're straight, you're heterosexual, they get new victims,
Mm-hmm.
So that's the point, is they've changed identity and originally race and now identity more broadly, because that won't, your economic status does not affect your victimization, as they have put it. So that is one reason, because they want, and the reason they want that is because only the government can come in and properly fix those problems as they define it. So that's part A. Part B of why they're doing this is because of electoral imperatives. Back in after the 2012 election, I was fascinated by the post-election analysis, particularly by people on the right. Obama narrowly wins re-election against Mitt Romney, and what developed as a meme at the time was this idea of the blue wall, that the Democrat Party had these states, I forget how many of them, it was like 17 states or so, that had gone Democrat every year from 1984 and or 1988 through the 2012 election. And those blue wall states comprised 242 of the 272 electoral votes you needed to win. So I thought, so then what was going on the right, the political right, was whoever the Republican nominee is in 2016 is going to have to run the table on all the competitive swing states in order to win, because they start out at such a disadvantage. Democrats only had to win a couple of extra states out of those swing states to win the presidency. And I thought to myself, well, everybody's going to focus on how do you compete in swing states. I started to say, well, what is the weakness of the blue wall? And I hired a researcher from the University of Pennsylvania to research the blue wall for me. And so we went back and looked at the 2012 election and every election back in 1976 by demography. And it revealed an amazing story, which is the Democrat Party has become the party of Blacks, Hispanics, single women, millennials, and the wealthy educated. It is no longer had no, and so we're writing this and developing this in 2013, and what it showed when you looked at the demographics, I'll run through some 2012 numbers. The numbers apply today similarly. I just happen to remember the 2012 numbers better. Obama won 93% of the Black vote in 2012. He won 67% of single women. He won 71% of Hispanics, and he won 60% of millennials. All those numbers were down slightly from his 2008 numbers when he had a much bigger victory. What's interesting about that is that he only won 39% of the white vote. And if you take out white millennials and white single women, he won about 33% of the white vote. So what had been happening roughly from 1980 until 2012 is the Democrat Party started to realize that their electoral chances were improved when they had a massive turnout of black voters and got a huge supermajority of them. Same thing with Hispanics, same thing with single women, and same thing with millennials. And later they added Asians and LGBTQ. And that's why group identity is important to them, because it's their means to create fear and resentment to get people to register and vote, and they get super majorities of them. And the reason they have to do that with those particular demographic groups is they can't win elections if they don't. So if the black vote shaves down to 85%, if single women goes from 67 to 60%, if Hispanics go from 71 to 65, 62, 63%, and so forth, all the blue states in that blue wall become competitive and become purple states and start to move to the right. That's what Trump actually did in 2016 in Michigan, in Wisconsin, and in Pennsylvania, and nearly pulled off in Minnesota. He narrowly lost Minnesota, which people forget. The reason Trump lost in 2020, by an even closer margin, is because Trump did even better with minorities in 2020, but white, affluent, educated men who had voted Republican switched and voted for Biden because they were offended by Trump's nature. So the 2024 election is going to play out in this way all over again. So those two things, electoral imperatives and the critical race theory and Marxism in the government as the only one that can fix those grievances, are the two reasons that this has all become part of the lexicon and dominating our culture.
I'm really glad you brought up electoral demographics, because I feel like my family is a great example of kind of how things change. So I'm from an interracial family. Both my parents voted for Obama, then both my parents voted for Trump. So you can kind of see where moderates were kind of appealed to. We're from Maryland. We're from right outside D.C. And we were so excited. I remember I was very young when this happened, but we were so excited in 2008 when Obama won. And then I remember my dad over the years becoming angrier and just saying, such a disappointment for the black community, such a disappointment for everybody. He did nothing to help us, nothing at all. And he's also a business owner, and he works in Homeland Security. And so he voted for Trump. He was like, I don't think Trump's going to start any new wars. I think Trump's going to be great for the economy. And that's kind of why he and my family kind of made that switch. And I think that there's going to be a lot more, especially black men, I think are going to be switching to Trump, and more black men have been switching to Republican in general, but specifically Trump over time. I think you made a great point that while the Democrats are the party of black, Hispanic, Asian, LGBTQ, where does that leave whites? Because what Republicans have done is say, we don't see color, we don't like identity politics, and that's great. And I think that's great in a utopia, in a perfect world, but people do see color, and the Democrats play by color. And so that leaves poor whites specifically, I think, in a very interesting state, because they need help too. There are white hoods and white trailer parks and white neighborhoods in Appalachia and West Virginia and things like that are just as bad, maybe even worse than some black hoods and some Hispanic neighborhoods and things like that. But they don't really have anyone specifically naming them. I want to help this group of people in this neighborhood. They're whites. They're being ignored by the establishment. There really is no one, there's nowhere for them to go. And so a lot of them do end up on welfare, voting blue, or being part of like a blue union. How do you combat that?
It's a great question. It leads to, I love this topic in general, because I think it's a fascinating commentary on the human condition and sort of where politics is today, and also the Trump phenomena. People are always mystified by Trump. It's really not a mystery. He truly has paid attention, as you're describing now, the forgotten man, and woman. Going back to those numbers, I'll use Illinois as an example, but ratio-wise, these numbers apply to all the blue states that we were talking about here, all the sort of blue wall states that we're referring to. In Illinois, if you look at those four groups, African Americans, Hispanics, single women, millennials, those four groups, as voting blocks in the 2012 election, they cast votes. I don't remember which is which, but let's just say millennials were about 500,000 votes. And then it raged up to African Americans, I think were about 1.1 million votes. And then the other two were somewhere in between those two. There was 1.5 million white men in 2012 who didn't vote at all because they feel disaffected and disenfranchised. Many of them are living in those trailers in those communities you're talking about. And Trump's giving voice to those people who feel disaffected and disenfranchised, and not just men, it's women too. So part of, I think, what is happening, though, and to answer your question is, and I think Trump actually said this to some, again, I'm not an advocate for Trump necessarily at all. There's a lot I like, a lot I don't like. But I think the more important thing is, what is the most important part of who you are as a human being? The group identity assigned to you by somebody living in the affluent North Shore of Chicago, or your life situation? And I would make the argument that for most people, your father included, your life situation trumps everything. Your identity is part of your whole, and it is important, and it absolutely must be seen and respected. My maleness must be seen and respected. My age must be seen and respected. My beautiful Greek nose should be seen and respected, and you can't help but see it. But it's part of me, right? It's who I am. And all of us have whatever that is about us that makes us unique, that the left wants to turn into the defining aspect of our personality and thus our belief system. What we need to do is say, I care about you and the wholeness of you and what you want to do, what your dream is, and how we can create more opportunities to make your dream possible. And I want to respect all that makes you an individual. I see your color. I see your gender. I frankly don't care too much about your sexuality unless we're at a bar on a Tuesday night and I've had 3 bourbons. Otherwise, I don't care. You know, that's where it should be. That's the province of that, is in private life. It shouldn't be so much about public life, in my view. So I think that's how we address it. We have to treat people as individuals. You know, I always go back to the founders. You know, the individual reigns supreme, and then it's individuals coming together in voluntary cooperation and thus collective action that creates the greatness that is the society.
Okay, I have a question. This is one I was like dying to ask you because I know you have so much experience with unions, taking on unions. We even talked about teachers' unions earlier. Are unions inherently antithetical to liberty? Like, do they inherently cause issues with like an individual's ability to advocate for themselves within the workplace? Or is there some situation in a free market where unions can be just like a nice, effective tool for workers to bargain with an employer?
So it's inherent in the Constitution that people have a right to freely assemble with whomever they choose. So the idea of people coming together to form a union voluntarily to do whatever they want to do, whether it's to form a church, whether it's to form a community group or form a work group that's going to go negotiate as a collective group with an employer, is perfectly reasonable. What is not reasonable, and what makes today's unions not reasonable, in my view, not only anti-liberty, but I think should be unconstitutional, is that unions are given the force of law because the Democrats passed laws, the Davis-Bacon Act and many others since, that allow unions to form a union and then have exclusive rights to collectively bargain with an employer. That employer has to bargain with that union once they're designated as the union for that employer. I don't think that's right. I think the employer should say, I want to hear from 6 different union groups, and you all can compete to get my contract. You can come to me collectively, or you can come to me as individuals, but all of you can compete. So that's part A, is the employer's requirement to exclusively bargain, I think, is what makes it anti-liberty and, in my view, anti-human and unconstitutional. The second part of it is that unions are coercive. Most of the people that are in unions today never signed up for the union. It was members way back, sometimes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago when the union was originally formed, and there's never been a vote since. If you're going to form a union, every member of that union should have a right to opt out at the drop of a hat. You know what? This union's been fantastic for me for 7 years. I want out. I want to go do something different. I actually want to negotiate individually, or I'm going to go get a different job. I resign my union membership just like you resign your church membership or you resign a job. That's how it should work. If we had that in place with a few others, then I think the power of the unions, this is of course why they don't want it would devolve the power of the union to the worker. When the Janus versus AFSCME case was at the Supreme Court, when I was chairman of Liberty Justice Center, which brought that case with Mark Janus as our plaintiff, Mark was an amazing and courageous plaintiff. worked for the state of Illinois, and we go all the way to the Supreme Court. And so I was there twice. I was there as part of the protests in support of Mark out in front of the Supreme Court the day it was heard in February. I believe it was February 26th of 2018. And then I was in the courtroom with Mark and Governor Rauner, who played a very important role in making this case happen when the case was heard and came down. What was interesting about the day in February when the protest was going on is the unions were next door doing their protest right next to us on the steps. And they sent some infiltrators over to try to disrupt our protest. These two women ended up near me with their signs, workers' rights, workers' rights. And I looked at our signs and I said, look at our signs. It says, power to the worker. So we want the same thing.
Right.
We want, and I said, what do you think this is about? This Supreme Court case is about? And they didn't know. I said, well, let me ask you a question. Who should control your relationship with your union? Should you as an individual control your relationship with your union, or should the union boss control you and define your relationship with the union? And they both kind of looked at me with that look like, I think this is a trap question, but I can't help but answering it. Like they said, I think I should control it. I said, then you should be protesting over here. You're on our side because we want to give power to you to define your relationship with the union. And they kind of sheepishly went back because you don't change a tribe so easily. But they went back over, and it was just a really revealing moment about the nature of unions and what they do to people. Unions are very much like what we've been talking about the government. They subjugate them and take away their agency.
Yeah, I suspect you planted a real seed of doubt for those women. and like you said, like the herd mentality is not so easily broken. But yeah, I just wanted to clarify that with you because I know you've had a lot of experience. It's been really interesting to watch what's been happening in the strikes and negotiations within Hollywood. I'm not sure if these unions are compulsory memberships, but they are. But I haven't,
Yes.
I don't mind like the idea that a group could, bargain with the big bosses in Hollywood, but I do mind that a lot of actors and screenwriters were forced to sit on the sidelines and not work for a really long time, lest they be bullied and outcast in the industry that they want to grow in. That seems really unfair to me. And I actually know several actors who were very, they were scraping by out of work because they weren't allowed to go on set for several months. So
That's insane.
yeah.
That is
There's a lot of
insane.
social pressure within these.
Are these people like from like around Atlanta?
Yeah,
Oh,
Atlanta's
okay.
a big filming hub. A lot of people don't know that. There's a lot of studios here. Tyler Perry actually has a big studio and
I love Medea.
estate out in south of Atlanta.
I do know that because I'm involved with a studio in Atlanta. I do some consulting work for them. And also, you should know that Georgia, I'm sure, I don't know this for a fact, but I can now say with certainty that Georgia probably gives film subsidies, tax credits.
Right.
Which
That is correct.
artificially created a market in Atlanta.
Right.
It would be
right.
fun to see if it would exist the same way if there was no film subsidy.
Yeah.
It might exist someplace else.
Yeah.
Huh, that's actually interesting. I want to look into that because there could be other cities where it would be better suited. I do know there's like a lot of creatives here in general, like pre the big kind of like Hollywood-esque boom. But I know that before we wanted to wrap up, you wanted to bring up the billion question, right?
Yes. So I've heard that you have an interesting theory and proposal for the United States to get us to 1 billion. Can you explain to us why we should pursue 1 billion citizens in the United States and what kind of methods we should take to get to that population growth?
Well, the first thing we should do is secure the border. We have to have a secure border in the modern 21st century for all the reasons I think most people understand. There are a few open border people. I'm certainly not one of them. I don't think you can preserve liberty and the American founding and the American miracle if you don't control your border. So the way I put that is that we should put the same rules in place at the Canadian and the Mexican border as we have at JFK or O'Hare or LAX or any other international airport. When you come off a plane from another country and you have a foreign passport, you go through customs and border control and go through a normal process. And if you have a visa to apply for citizenship, you go through that normal process. That's what we should do along our borders. But having said that, now that we've done that, I think the United States, as a culture, not a government, should create a strategic goal of getting to 1 billion people by the end of the century for a very simple reason. Prior to 1900, really, the new frontier was geography driven. right? The settlement of the continent and the settlement of the planet, which is largely now settled. So our ambition cannot be pursued in terms of more land mass other than space travel, which is a long-term thing, which I think we should pursue. But where is the new frontier? The new frontier is human capacity. The greatest natural resource on Earth is a human being. And human beings, when you are in a growth mode, create the greatest miracles of invention and creativity on Earth, whether it's medicines that save people's lives and improves people's lives, whether it's inventions that improve our quality of life and expand our mental and emotional and recreational horizons. It all stems from somebody who has an idea as an entrepreneur to create an invention that does something very simple, which is serving other people well. The essence of the founding of this country is that entrepreneurs start a business with a singular purpose, which is to serve other people well. When they raise the capital to start that business, their own or others, what do they do with that capital? They hire people and put them to productive work that is meaningful, and they grow and they build for the purpose of serving others well. It is the greatest service enterprise ever created in the human sphere to improve the human condition. And that is the greatest natural resource, is people to make that system work. In the world, you have, roughly speaking, China and India tied with about 1.3 billion people. And we are in a global competition, most certainly with China, and they have a huge people advantage. They have 1 billion people more than we do. And so as the demographic dynamics of China play out in the rest of the 21st century, they're going to actually shrink for all the reasons that most of your viewers probably know. So the United States actually has a strategic advantage through immigration to add to our population strategically, to put us in a better position economically, and thus, from a global security point of view, ensure our security at the middle to end of the 21st century and not be surpassed by China and perhaps even subjugated by China. So we should have a very thoughtful, diverse approach to immigration. We should welcome people from every continent, from every country, but we're not obligated to bring people in. You know, we don't have to bring people in from Iran if they want to kill us. We don't have to bring people in from China who want to infiltrate us and steal our technology, but we can bring people in from everywhere. We should be bringing people in from Central America and South America, from Eastern and Western Europe, from Asia. I mean, we should even bring in some penguins from Antarctica. I mean, we should bring people from everywhere. And we should get to 1 billion people. And it's not as insane as it sounds. If you actually look at the growth at 330 million people, it's a fairly modest growth per year. And yes, I do believe there should be some requirements and demands where you have to assimilate and become American. We don't want to balkanize the country. Spanish in America are sort of our 2 dual languages. We don't need more. That's enough. And let's make sure that people become Americans. My grandfather came over from Greece in 1909, I believe was the year, and there was no greater honor for that generation of immigrants than to become American, and we have to go back to that mindset as opposed to coming here like Ilan Omar in Minneapolis, who never becomes an American.
Oh, goodness.
Guys, make sure you say Somalis, not Somalians.
Right. I'm assuming you saw the
sassy
speech
about
that she gave to a crowd of Somalis where she was basically saying she's Somalia first. So, you know, shout out to Ilan Omar, love you. Actually, we don't. But, okay, so it's interesting that you brought up basically immigration from all corners of the world. What about increasing our birth rates? Because I've been personally very concerned about American birth rates, you know, falling below replacement level. I believe it's below 2. It's like 1.1 or 1 point something per family.
It's the curse of affluence.
Right, because you know, especially with women, we know both of us are in our careers. A lot of women, they simply wait too late. Or by the time they do have kids, they're just able to have less kids. They're having 2 and 3 instead of both. My grandfather and my grandmother both had 8 to 10 siblings. So it's kind of like one of those things where it's just not normal to have a lot of kids. And personally, I would prefer the population to grow to 1 billion through increasing our birth rates. I mean, we can have, you know, merit-based immigration and all that kind of stuff, but I would just want to put increasing our family sizes kind of at the forefront of that population growth conversation. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm a fan of that. The replacement birth rate is 2.1. You have to have 2.1 births in order to, for every woman in order to have a replacement birth rate. The United States has, for the first time, fallen below 2.1, or I think we're around 1.8 right now.
That sounds
we're not in quite the crisis situation of Italy and Japan, who are down around 1.3. And you can look and see in those countries what is happening. Those countries are literally atrophying and shrinking and losing their innovative edge. And as a result of that is why the best natural resource is people. People create innovation and growth. People create human fulfillment, and that's why we want to grow population. I'm a big fan of trying to do it this way, but what I don't want to do is do it through government intervention and government social engineering. We want to do it through two ways. One is culture, and how we talk about the joy of parenthood and the rewards of parenthood, as opposed to some of the self-involved, I'm only going to have one child or no child. I think, that's right for some people. We had one child. We tried to have more, but because of what you just said, we started late. My daughter was born when I just short of my 40th birthday, and my wife was a little younger than me, but still there's a cliff, as you probably know. It's very hard for women on average to have babies after 35. So I think we need to change the way we talk about and the joys of parenthood, and parenthood is a joyful experience, not without its challenges, but it's joyful. The second thing, though, is that our entire tax scheme and the way we tax people and families is actually anti-procreation, not in a religious sense, but we tax people the opposite of the way we should. What happens right now is you two in your 20s are being taxed at whatever your particular marginal rate is as you're at the beginning of your climb in terms of income. By the time you get to your 30s and 40s, when your income will rise, what happens is as your income goes up, of course, you're taxed at a higher marginal rate. Right around $40,000, the marginal rate goes to 22%. And I think it's somewhere around $80,000, it goes up even more. I forget what it is, maybe 30%. And the whole, that is evil, because what happens is when you're in your 30s and 40s is right when you have an opportunity to do family formation, have the kids, pay for the kids, get a house, 2 cars, 3 cars, all of that sort of thing. All of that is happening at the same time the government's taking a larger portion of your marginal income. We should do the opposite. The way it should work is, so long as you're putting 15% of your money into a retirement account and saving, you don't pay any taxes at the beginning of your life. Like right now, you should be paying 0 taxes. And then when you're 50 and you've accumulated this nest egg and you've had marginal income that wasn't taxed to pay for that house and pay for those kids, and so you have more liquidity, you'll be more open to having that 3rd child or that 4th child because the government's taking so much. Now when you're in your 50s and now you've got a couple $1 million in the bank because you've been saving all that time, now you pay a very high tax rate. It should be a flat tax rate, but now you pay a very high tax rate at the peak of your earning power for the last 20 years. That's what we should do to change the way this works. And
I like this tax solution personally.
Me too. Me too. Because to your exact point, it's just making it so much harder for when you're trying to build your life. It's setting people up to only be able to financially have kids in their 40s, which is just so unrealistic. And like my parents, they started kind of late. My mom has 3 kids. I was born when she was 35 and I'm the oldest, and she had my brother when she was 41, so she's very much an outlier. Not everybody can do like that. It's really just ridiculous. And so imagine how much worse the situation will be, not even our generation, maybe not even Generation Alpha, but my grandchildren. I mean, it just, if the Federal Reserve, if inflation keeps going the way we're going, if the tax situation just keeps going the way we're going, I mean, okay, maybe I do want 1 billion people.
It's pretty dire.
Maybe I do want 1 billion people just to fight against this.
Yeah,
so
and
that provides some hope, I guess.
But I do think, so the national conservatives claim they have a solution for this, right? Which is a child tax credit or some kind of welfare system where people are being paid for children. Guess what? People have done that before. Argentina did that. And what ended up happening was a bunch of people moved to Argentina, got on the welfare system, had a ton of babies so that they could get more welfare money, and now the economy is crashing.
Right.
Like in a really, really significant, dreadful way. And those benefits are eventually going to get taken away. And here you have a generation that's been created by dependency. So it's a huge recipe for disaster. I agree that most of this needs to be cultural, and then we need to make sure we aren't disincentivizing people through the tax system. Culturally, I think we should just be encouraging more religiosity and more like community orientation. Mm-hmm. I think like the phones, the dating apps, like none of this is encouraging the kind of dating culture that results in marriage. And I think that's really where the issue comes in.
And to your point, they've replaced all of these good things, community, church, family, babies, with just government, with phones, with dating apps, with quick satisfaction, with SNAP benefits, with food stamps and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of my takeaway from this, from a lot of our conversation, John, is just the disconnect that the government has created between people and the dire need to repair those bonds to get to that 1 billion population. And I started this conversation being like, why would I want 1 billion people to live in this country? But I'm thinking about it more. It's like, first of all, we have the space. You know, we're a huge country. We're a large country. We do have the space. And to your point, I mean, we have China, India, they have outpaced us by 1 billion, you know, and we are below, or we're nearing below or dire replacement rates.
Right.
It's actually serious.
And they're going to start dropping in population, but so are we, right?
Right.
And that's going to become an issue. Either way, before we wrap up, do you have any other words of wisdom to impart on us before you leave?
No, I don't have any particular words of wisdom. I do have words of encouragement. I think the show is amazing. I can't wait to watch it. I had not watched it previously, so I'll be diving into some of your past episodes and paying attention and make sure I get on your distribution list. And I do think that the hope of the country rests very much with people like you, people who are going to be activists and committed to the cause of liberty and building organizations to take back the commanding heights of the American cultural narrative. That is where the action is. And I encourage you and all your friends and colleagues and anybody watching to think about how they can get involved in the movement where we can control, not control, but rather take back the commanding heights of the American cultural narrative in media, among influencers, and of course, among the American people.
Well, thank you so much, because I feel inspired. I think Maggie feels more inspired now. And thank you for coming on the show. And I will just say, this has been one of the better episodes, so maybe don't have the highest hopes for some of the other ones.
No, we have great episodes.
We do, but this is one of the best because of you, because you're a great guest, and I hope our viewers and listeners also feel inspired. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you both for the opportunity, and I look forward to sharing a Manhattan with you at some place down the road.
Well, thank you so much, John. I know I'm inspired. I think Maggie's inspired as well.
Absolutely.
I agree with your 1 billion population points. And I would just like to say thank you to the viewers for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, comment, share your thoughts, ask any questions, and we will see you next time on Indoctrination. Bye.
Bye.